Previously on the Scream Retrospective, Welshy reviewed Scream 1. Now back to the Scream Retrospective.
Well, that was Scream 1. Scream 2 finds our heroes... Hello?
Hello, Welshy.
Hi. Who is this?
You tell me.
Well, I have no idea.
Scary night, isn't it? With all the murders and all, it's like something out of
It's the
a...
middle of the day. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun's still out.
What? Oh, right.
Yeah. Oh. So who are you?
The question isn't who I am. The question is, where am I?
So, where are you?
Your front porch.
I don't have a front porch. It's more like a
Oh,
garden.
for the love of fuckers. I'm outside your door, okay?
Oh, that's great. What do you want me to do about it?
That's the original part.
Is that supposed to make sense? What, you want me to open my door to check you're outside, calling your bluff?
Uh-huh.
Only a complete idiot would do something like that. And where can I find a complete idiot around here? Hold on, I got another call. Hello?
You cold?
Go away. Alright, fine, I'll call your bluff. Come on, Rob. This could be dangerous. Okay, little buddy. Confession time. One of us has got to stay and look after this room. One of us has got to go out there and see if there is someone outside. Now, if you bear with me, I think I've come up with a fair way of deciding who should stay and who should go. It's based on age, usefulness, cuteness, and the most important thing, the communication factor. You know, you've got to be relied on to get back to someone as soon as they ask you a question, correct? Correct. Good man. I knew you'd understand. Good luck. Hey, I can always buy another one.
You'll see him in your nightmares, you'll see him in your dreams. He'll appear out of nowhere, but he ain't what he seems. You'll see him in your head on the TV screen. Hey buddy, I'm warning you to turn it on. He's a ghost, he's a god, he's a man, he's a guru. You're one microscopic cog in his catastrophic plan, designed and directed by his red right hand.
Of all the things in the world, I kind of wish I had a lock on my door right now. Hey, speaking of which... Perfect! Man, I'm thirsty. Just in case. Hi! I'm Welshy. But you should already know that by now. And barring any storyline interruptions, at least not for the next 30 minutes, hopefully, I can get back to talking about Scream. So after they released the original Scream in 1996, the slasher genre was suddenly cool again. Or should that be profitable? And as in the past, a whole host of new slasher films started to appear, all attempting to emulate the success of Scream with the same kind of formula, be it the same self-referential style of humour, the same sort of mystery, or the same type of mood. They didn't succeed, and in some cases, people view Scream as one of the darkest eras in horror. I respectfully disagree with those opinions. I mean, it was only nearly 10 years later that people were accusing Saw of exactly the same thing, starting a dark era in horror, this time with torture porn. Scream also seems to have coined the term meta. Now, back in 1997, I visited a lot of message boards. I was a part of a Scream message board. It was my first experience and introduction into internet forums, all that sort of thing. Nobody was using that term. It seems to have been thrown around a lot more recently. So it seems to me that Scream was meta before meta was even a word. Which begs the question, what does meta actually mean? And no, I can't be bothered to look it up.
Scream was a surprise success at the box office, and with that success, Dimension were quick to sign up a sequel, and exactly 1 year later, Scream 2 was released, bringing back every major character from the first film, including with the writer Kevin Williamson and director Wes Craven. In fact, nearly everyone who worked on Scream behind the scenes was back for the sequel. The story also manages to move several of the characters forward and call back to events that happened in Scream 1, Sydney's relationship with Cotton and Dewey's relationship with Gale being good examples. Set 2 years after the original, with Sydney and Randy now studying at Windsor College, Gale's a successful reporter and writer after the publication of her book, which she titled The Woodsboro Murders, Dewey on leave from the force due to a severed nerve thanks to the knife injury he sustained in his back at the end of the first film, and for the first time becoming a prominent character, Liev Schreiber playing Cotton Weary, the man Sydney originally accused of murdering her mother and had sent to prison. Again, was actually too young to see Scream 2 in the cinema, so I didn't get a chance to experience the film with an audience, but the hysteria that had been built up for the release of this film was like something I'd never seen before. Commercials, interviews, shots, shorts, trailers, features, The Mask. Scream was everywhere by this point, and with the release and the success of shows like Dawson's Creek and Buffy, the whole thing seemed to be packed with people who appeared in all these shows. It was almost like a who's who of the people who were on TV back in the day, and it kind of makes me sad for some of those shows. Not all of them, of course. Nostalgia.
Now I know you're probably expecting a Doug cameo roundabout now because I said that, but I'm not important enough to get a cameo from Doug. No, I'm serious. I'm not. Can we move along?
Scream 2 was released under a buzz of anticipation. It was a guaranteed hit no matter what the critics thought, and had a huge number of the current TV stars wanting to be a part of it.
Despite having a few more obvious flaws, Scream 2 is my favourite of the franchise at the moment. The only thing that lets it down for me is the killer reveal, the last scene basically, which is a shame and it's something I will cover. Everything else, apart from one excruciating singing sequence, which again I will cover, sadly, is really, really good. And Scream 2, to me, does have the best death sequence in the Scream series. It's also got some great Stoker moments and some great tension moments. Taking out Wes Craven's New Nightmare, I'd say this is Kevin Williamson at his best, and Wes Craven at his best too.
The film opens outside a movie theatre where we meet two Windsor students, Maureen Evans, played by Jada, as she was then, Pinkett, and her boyfriend Phil Stevens, played by Omar Epps, and they're heading in to watch Stab, a movie that's been adapted from the book The Woodsboro Murders, written by Gale Weathers, which details the killings from the first film. So already less than a minute in and we have the surreal experience with the film becoming almost self-referential to its own original. This is actually a really clever way of keeping the movie within the movie dialogue real, which is something that was one of Scream's biggest strengths. Now, as this is a sneak preview for special ticket holders, every attendee gets a Ghostface costume complete with fake knife, and the audience is full of horror nuts, with gags and stunts being performed all over the showroom. The film starts and we see Heather Graham playing the role of Casey Becker, the role Drew Barrymore played in the first film.
Confused?
The scene plays out very much like it did in the original Scream, but I love the little cliché nods that Williamson and Craven add to the scene. Examples being the thunder outside, and the even bigger cliché of having the victim either naked, semi-naked, or in the shower. So many horror films have a scene like this, and it's fun to see the makers poke fun at it by including it in the movie's movie. It's also a chance for Williamson to put himself into the role of the horror movie watcher, as he has Maureen shout out some of the things I know people have shouted out while watching these movies.
Bitch, hang the phone up and star 69 his ass. Damn.
Of course, there are some other things people like to shout out while watching these films.
This film is awful. The lowest form of shit.
But to each his own. Maureen isn't a big fan of horror movies, or being scared, and leaves to get some popcorn. All over the theatre, people are dressed up as Ghostface, messing around and having fun. But when she returns to the showing, Phil thinks now would be a good time to pull a scare.
What an ass. That's just what I said.
Phil goes to the bathroom to relieve himself, while Maureen heads back to the showroom, taking his spot just as we see Casey's final moments begin on the screen. In the bathroom, Phil comes face to face with two ghost faces, both using the urinals to relieve themselves, and so, unable to hold it, he heads into the stall, only to be distracted by some strange mutterings coming from the neighbouring stall.
Veering off topic for a second here, I've always wondered myself if the mumblings in that stall are in any sort of way a small nod to Black Christmas. If you've ever watched the original Black Christmas, a really good film by the way, the killer will ring the house and make noises and say things and obscenities and make some really hideous noises down the phone to the students. And I've always wondered if this is like a small little nod to that. I might be completely wrong though, so feel free to correct me if I am.
Leaning in for a closer look, a new Ghostface spears his head and ear, resulting in Phil's death, which goes unheard by the two urinating ghosts. Back at the screening, Casey's being stalked through the house and makes her escape, just like she did in the first film. And with Maureen willing her on, a masked figure wearing Phil's coat sits next to her.
Baby, give it up.
And in another delicious slice of irony, Maureen seems to make a commentary on her own fate.
It looks like she's about to get it. Want some popcorn?
Don't mind if I do.
As the whole screening watches the final attack of Casey, Maureen hides against Phil, only to pull away and notice blood on her hands. Before she has time to react, the killer pulls a knife and stabs her as she stares in disbelief. With the whole screening going crazy as they watch the killer on screen putting an end to Casey, Maureen stumbles around mortally wounded. Surrounded by Ghostface masks and clearly hurt, she can do nothing as the killer stabs her again and again, with no one actually realizing what's going on. After a final stab, she uses her last ounce of strength to climb up in front of the screen to show the idiots in the audience that this is very real, and after a final scream of pain with the Ghostface mask imposed large from behind, she falls backwards, dead.
So I've always felt that this first scene is a really good example of writing to audience expectations. Because with the release of Scream 2, everybody wanted to see Ghostface. He's one of the prime reasons for coming to see this film. People want to see the Ghostface mask again. It's like when you go to see a Halloween film, you want to see Michael Myers. You go to a Friday the 13th film, you want to see Jason Voorhees. People wanted to see Ghostface. So, in the very first scene, Kevin Williamson gives us Ghostface. He gives us a lot of Ghostface, but then smartly pulls back. And you don't really get to see Ghostface again until the end of the movie. There are a few, fleeting appearances here and there, but he doesn't really come out on force until the final act. This is a really good thing because it doesn't ruin it. His appearances actually mean something because you want to see him again. He isn't in it all the time. This is a mistake Scream 3 made, in my opinion. And that is something I will eventually cover.
Moving forward to the next morning, we're reintroduced to Sidney Prescott, now in college, and she seems to have moved on with her life and put the events of the previous film behind her, despite the occasional prank call.
Hello, Sydney.
Yes?
What's your favorite scary movie?
Who is this?
You tell me.
Corey Gillis, 5550176.
She manages to brush these off like they mean nothing. We're also introduced to Sydney's roommate Hallie, played by Elsa Neal, and thanks to a quick change of channel, we see that Cotton Weary, the man Sydney accused of murdering her mother in the first film, is now free, and making regular appearances on TV shows trying to rake in some money for his false imprisonment. Through the girls' conversation, we also learn that Hallie has been trying to get Sydney involved with campus activities, most notably trying to get her signed up to one of the sororities, Delta Lambda Zeta.
Now, I'm not American, as you can tell, so I have no idea what these things are, but from the looks of it, it just looks like they involve massive amounts of drinking. So get in there, my girl!
The conversation doesn't remain casual for long as Sydney and Hallie watch the news and learn of the deaths of Maureen and Steve at the preview of Stab. With an air of inevitability, Sydney heads out to find Randy, but is ambushed by reporters along the way. We arrive at Randy's film theory class, which introduces us to Sarah Michelle Gellar's Cece Cooper and Timothy Oliphant's Mickey, as well as a little cameo from Joshua Jackson. In the midst of the class, the whole room has another interesting conversation, this time on the theory of movie sequels.
Are you suggesting that someone's trying to make a real-life sequel?
Stab 2? Who'd want to do that? Sequels suck. No.
The class debates sequels of all sorts, from horror to action,
Aliens, far better than the first.
to drama.
The Godfather, Part 2.
Yet, there is always one line here that's always annoyed me.
Aliens is a classic, okay? Get away from her, you bitch. I believe the line is stay away from her, you bitch.
No! No, it's not! Watch!
Get away from her, you bitch!
I've never understood why he says that line. And if anybody out there does, please, tell me.
Sydney arrives shortly and Randy leaves with her after noting how he would make a sequel different from the original.
I'd let the geek get the girl.
Just like the first film where Randy reeled off the rules of surviving a horror movie, I just love this scene for its sheer cheek in attacking horror sequels. He doesn't go after horror in general, but Randy does note that the entire horror genre was destroyed by sequels, which is again a funny comment for a character to say when they're actually in a horror sequel. Sydney is convinced the killings are linked to them, while Randy is much more dismissive, putting it down to coincidence. It's at this point that most of the principal cast start to introduce themselves, as we meet Sydney's new boyfriend Derek, played by Jerry O'Connell, and with the media circus in full swing, the reintroduction of Gail Weathers, now with new hair and a new cameraman. Joel. Gail herself has become a celebrity due to the events of the first film and wards off attention from a number of reporters, most notably Debbie Salt, played by Laurie Metcalf, who seems to view Gail as her idol. With a press conference held, we meet the, I guess, heads of Delta Lambda Zeta, Sister Lois and Sister Murphy, who let our happy band know that there's a party tonight and Sydney's invited.
Yeah, in any other movie, these guys would be so dead.
As the girls wander off, Sydney spots a nearby figure who turns out to be Dewey, who heard about the killings and caught the first plane down, having become almost a surrogate big brother to Sydney and Randy since the end of Scream 1. Sydney and Dewey reconnect, with Dewey warning her about the possible dangers from people in her life, and after Dewey departs, Sydney is approached by Gail, who, in typical Gail fashion, attempts to use the situation to her advantage and brings Sydney face to face for the first time since she testified against him in court with Cotton Weary, in an impromptu interview that Sydney knew nothing about. I just love leaving these scenes, as he's playing a guy who wants to be viewed as a good guy and the man of the people, but he's clearly out for himself and playing it up to the cameras because he believes the world owes him something. His little glance at the camera after his speech just sells it.
I just like to say that I forgive and forget. Just like you, I'd like to get back on with my own life.
Sydney really doesn't like this and responds in a way Gail is all too familiar with. Humiliated, Gail stalks off and runs into Dewey, and we see a much tougher side to Dewey as he confronts Gail about how she wrote his character in the book and tells her a few home truths about her as a person.
What I think is that you're money-hungry, fame-seeking, and forgive me for saying mediocre right now. She's got a cold storage shed where her heart should be. No offense intended.
Ooh. I think it's safe to say that Gail didn't call much after the events of the first film.
So at this point, all the players have been introduced, and now it's about giving the audience what they came in for. A Ghostface attack. While Sydney and Harry arrive at the party promised earlier, we switch to sorority house Omega Beta Zeta, with Cece home alone as sober sister, watching TV and chatting to a friend. A call from someone she believes to be her boyfriend interrupts her phone conversation. But after switching over, she learns this isn't her drunk boyfriend.
Okay, Ted, you sound loaded. What's up?
Who's Ted?
This scene is a departure from the original Casey scene, as the caller doesn't really attempt to be flirtatious or misleading, signaling to everybody that this isn't Billy Loomis or Sue Marker back from the grave. This is a whole new Ghostface. That message gets across pretty quickly though. Cece thinks she hears something upstairs and does the smart thing. She calls security and she leaves the house. Sadly, her connection's about as good as mine in work, and her signal is so bad she has to go back into the house so she can be heard. The upstairs occupant turns out to be Cece's housemate, but in her interruption, someone sneaks in unnoticed. And after her housemate departs, another call freaks Cece out, and she sets the house alarm before beginning to move slowly around the house, while a film plays in the background. Exactly the same as the first movie. The tension builds to another call. And an attack, and this Ghostface isn't fucking round, making the cliched mistake of running up the stairs of this insanely large house. She eventually runs out of steps, and Ghostface sends her crashing through a window before stabbing her twice and finally throwing her off the roof to her death. They just killed Buffy. Back at the party, Mickey and Derek arrive late. And Mickey immediately gets into a sequel discussion with Randy, citing Empire Strikes Back as a superior sequel, and earns major points for me for claiming the Ewoks blow. The happy mood doesn't last though, as police arrive at Omega Beta Zeta and the party files out due to all the activity. Little touches here like Debbie getting the scoop on Gail because of Gail's late arrival, Gail's threat to Joel, as well as Dewey's anger towards her, all come out in little glances, which only adds to the tension and suspicion. Back at Delta, Derek tells Sydney to get her jacket so he can take her home, but just before she leaves, the phone rings and Sydney, I'm assuming in an attempt to show she's trying not to let these events get to her, answers it.
Hello, Sydney. Remember me?
Hearing this voice from the past, it's still an awesome voice by the way, triggers another Ghostface attack as Sydney avoids his charge and his knife.
I like that. It's not as good as Dewey's scream from the first film, but I still love that expression.
Sydney manages to get outside only to run into Derek, who goes back into the house looking for the killer. Dewey arrives seconds later and stalks the halls, finding Derek in the hallway bleeding from the arm. Alive, but the killer's disappeared, leaving only Lois and Murphy looking on. This final shot says so much with so little. Sydney is once again completely alone and can trust no one. At the hospital, as Derek is fixed up after his wound, which luckily and conveniently missed every vein, nerve and artery, Mickey comforts Sydney, but then gives her food for thought.
Why would anyone go back in that house anyway?
Interesting. The next day, running through the evidence, Gale and Dewey managed to find a connection between the current victims and the victims of Woodsboro.
Is Cece the girl's real name?
No, it's Casey Cooper.
As in Casey Becker? As well as your boyfriend, Stephen Orth.
As in Phil Stevens.
Maureen Evans, Maureen Prescott. That's Sydney's mother.
I think you have a copycat on your hands, Chief.
This, however, really doesn't end up going anywhere, but it's a nice idea, I guess. We learn that Sydney is now under armed guard and protection from the precinct's best detectives. And at lunch, Mickey theorizes about Randy possibly being the killer. Sydney shows her lack of trust in Derek by not sitting down next to him when he pulls up a chair. And now begins the most painful scene of the movie.
Worse than any kill, worse than any amount of acting or death in any Saw film, I give you Jerry O'Connell singing.
To the room. I think I love you.
Don't do this.
I think I love you. Isn't that what life is made of? No, it worries me to say I've never felt this way. Hey, I think I love you so.
Oh, Jesus Christ. It's so bad and so out of place in this movie. And the worst bit is everyone applauds him. Maybe they're cheering that he finished, I don't know, but they still applaud him.
You know, if somebody did that in my lunchroom, they would have been pelted with so much shit that they would have had to take a month off work just to let the bruises heal.
Derek, in an attempt to show where his loyalty lies, gives Sydney his sorority necklace, which is apparently a big no-no with the brothers. But then I've never really understood that side of college life. At a separate location, we learn that Tori Spelling did end up playing Sydney in Stab.
Okay, so just think, if they make a movie about you, who's gonna play you? I shudder to think.
I see you as a young Meg Ryan myself.
Thanks, Dewey. With my luck, they'd cast Tori Spelling.
And then we have a really fun conversation between Dewey and Randy in which they run through the suspects and the rules of horror sequels.
Number 1, the body count is always bigger. Number 2, the death scenes are always much more elaborate. More blood, more gore. Carnage, candy.
Suspects this time, as well as Dewey and Randy themselves, are listed from Randy as Hallie, Mickey, Derek, and even Gale, with Randy again using horror films to point out the reasons.
Mrs. Voorhees was a terrific serial killer, and there's always room for Candyman's daughter. She's sweet, she's deadly, she's bad for your teeth.
And for me, this is the kind of scene that shows that Jamie Kennedy was not only perfect for the role of Randy, but this is what sets Scream apart from any other horror franchise. The fact that these two can sit down and have this kind of conversation, and it doesn't feel out of place, is a testament to not only the writing and performance, but it's also the world that Williamson is writing in, and the world he's created. The problem with this scene, I'll come to later. Back with Sydney, who feels completely lost and isolated with her life at the moment, sits and talks to her, I'm guessing the director of the play she's due to star in. The play, it turns out, is about the tragic Greek mythological figure Cassandra, and I'm sure there's a touch of symbolism there given Sydney's position in the film. Symbolism?
No, I'm not doing it. Look, this video's already got 2 cameos in it. That's more than enough. If you want a video with cameos, go watch Panda Q&A.
Flame sausage, prostitute, popular, fun questions.
After this, of course.
Sydney and her director Gus have a long conversation about Sydney's inner strength and his belief that she can't hide from her fate and should embrace it. This kind of scene always makes me wonder what fate Kevin Williamson eventually had planned for Sydney. Had he written Scream 3, as the scene does seem to point to a bigger picture, or a possible self-sacrifice for the Sydney character some way down the road. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself there. As the group runs through rehearsal, Sydney spots Ghostface in a circle of masked figures, appearing and disappearing quickly before she eventually runs into him and is thrown to the floor. When she looks up, it's simply a fellow cast member, leaving the question, was he actually there, or is she really starting to crack up? Backstage, waiting for a ride from Mickey, Derek appears, as Mickey had to edit. But Sydney is now in no mood to even trust Derek, and asks him to back off and give her space. And reluctantly, he agrees.
And now, I present the best, the worst, the most popular, and one of the most hated scenes in the Scream series. How can it be all those things? Watch away.
Back outside, Dewey, Gale, Randy and Joel are sitting and talking about who could be the killer, if the killer is repeating Woodsboro, and if there is a possible pattern. Gale keeps getting phone calls from somebody, and at the mention of her previous cameraman Kenny, Joel suddenly gets cold feet and leaves the three survivors to continue their conversation. Another call goes ignored until Randy answers it.
Gale's not here.
I'm not interrupting anything, am I? You three look deep in thought.
Telling Randy to keep the killer on the phone, Dewey and Gale spread out looking for someone on a cell phone. We get miscues, false camera points of views, and a steady slow build in tension as Randy searches the park.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Showgirls. Absolutely frightening.
All the time keeping the killer talking while Dewey and Gale attempt the same until they actually do spot someone on a phone. It's at this point the killer decides to target Randy's character in the horror mythos.
Why are you even here, Randy? You'll never be the leading man.
Fuck you!
No matter how hard you try, you'll never be the hero, and you'll never, ever get the girl.
Wait! Shit!
Which only serves to piss Randy off and causes him to launch into a tirade about Billy and Stu.
Dude was a pussy-ass wet rat. And Billy Loomis, what the fuck? Jesus! What a rat-looking, homo-repressed mama's boy.
Sadly, Randy does this with his back to Joel's news van, and Ghostface strikes, dragging him inside as a trio of beatboxers go past, muting Randy's screams and shouts as we hear him stabbed again and again before Ghostface departs. And notice, again, how quick this Ghostface appearance is. The caller Dewey and Gale stalked turned out to be, of course, an innocent, and now they notice Randy missing, and with the reappearance of Joel, they open the news van to find Randy's dead and bloody corpse.
This scene is so good. There are no other words to describe it. Brilliantly written with the tension building and the musing pitched just right. Okay, I guess there are a lot of words that could describe it. But it was expertly handled and managed to shock pretty much everybody. I mean, watch the scene from the trailer.
You wanna be one of the big boys? Manson, Bundy, OJ?
And watch the scene again.
You wanna be one of the big boys? Huh? Manson, Bundy, OJ?
No one was expecting it. This happens at just the right time in the movie. You're at a point in the film where you almost feel comfortable as none of the surviving characters have been touched. And just when your walls have gone up, bang, one of them is killed off. It leaves a dark mood over the final parts of the film and leaves you feeling that now, anyone could go.
The bad thing about this scene is that it comes at the expense of Randy. The whole feel and style of Scream at this point had come to depend on Randy's character input. And with his death, the series, as it stood, and this is, without me seeing Scream 4, loses a little bit of its identity. It's almost like the writers, producers, and even the director knew what a mistake they'd made, because they bring Randy back for a Scream 3 in a cameo, and there was even talk about him actually being alive and that he'd only been wounded. Yeah, he looks a little bit more than wounded there, doesn't he? I mean, you only have to look at the trailers for Scream 4 to see that they're attempting to recreate the Randy character in this new generation. But Randy is dead, and now the shit is serious. A survivor is gone, and Sydney, at a computer in the library, gets an instant message announcing she's going to die tonight too. After removing her from the computer and putting her next to an open fucking doorway, Sydney is surprised by Cotton, who asks Sydney to take part in an interview with him, which will be conducted by Diane Sawyer. Sydney, who hates the press, refuses, and Cotton becomes confrontational, only to be arrested shortly after. Cotton, like Billy in the previous film, is released as the police have nothing on him, and now, finally, Gale drops the reporter hard bitch act and shows she really is terrified. First snapping at Debbie and then being abandoned by Joel, she turns to Dewey as he is pretty much the only friend she has left. Realizing that the killer is enjoying this and should be at every crime scene, Dewey and Gale grab Joel's camera and head off to find a VCR. Why they couldn't just use one at the station I've never known, but they head into the college, eventually ending up in the theatre room, where they watch back footage Joel has been shooting through the entire film, including Dewey's rant against Gale.
You're a money-hungry, fame-seeking, and forgive me for saying mediocre writer.
Far from being offended though, Gale throws Dewey atop the desk and the two have a far more heated makeout session than they did in the first film, which only gets interrupted by some new footage featuring all the film's victims. It's when the footage focuses on them that they finally turn around. Ever the hero, Dewey heads up to the projection box only to find it empty.
Dewey! There's no one there.
Danny's first.
And now Ghostface is out in force. Dewey, thanks to his limp, falls down the stairs while Gale manages to fight off Ghostface with, ironically, a phone, before running through the college and ended up in a sound studio, just managing to avoid being seen by the killer. A tense scene follows as Gale manages to stay one step ahead of Ghostface before shutting herself in a soundproof booth, which sadly doesn't have a lock.
So, I'm just guessing by that reaction it doesn't have a lock.
Safely tucked away and soundproofed, she doesn't hear Dewey enter the room and call out to her, nor does she hear him knocking on the glass trying to get her attention. Ghostface does though, and attacks, spearing Dewey from behind and stabbing him repeatedly while Gale can only watch in horror. Before Ghostface can continue his assault though, he spots Gale, forgets Dewey, and makes a beeline straight for her. Gale manages to save herself by pushing over a unit blocking Ghostface's entrance. And after a few really tense moments, Ghostface vanishes.
Alright, I love this scene. Brilliant tension, brilliant music, brilliant direction, just brilliant. I really need a thesaurus.
Back at the college, as Sydney and Hallie leave for an undisclosed location, Derek sees her off, promising that he will still be there when it's over. As Sydney drives away, a cloaked figure approaches Derek. But, far from being the killer, it turns out to be one of his sorority brothers, who are out to punish him for giving away his letters. That necklace thing. And from the looks of it, the punishment involves marking him with knives, tying him up and getting him drunk.
How come I never found out about these things in uni?
With the campus issuing a state locking, all the roads around the campus are deserted. This leads to another Ghostface attack, and he dispatches one of the detectives before assaulting the other and then climbing into the car. Clearing the car of the dead detective, Ghostface floors the accelerator, running over the second detective in the process. With the detective trying to get a shot off, Ghostface aims the car off-road and the car smashes into a collection of iron poles, one going right through the detective's skull.
Ooh, nasty.
So yeah, he's definitely dead. Sydney is the first to awaken from the collision and spots the killer unconscious in the front seat. Or is he?
Yeah, he is. Or is he? Oh, I'll stop doing that now.
Being a cop car, the two girls are sealed in the back and so have to resort to desperate measures to escape. Desperate measures involve pulling back the metal grate that separates them from Ghostface, at which point Sydney climbs through and is now sitting right next to the killer. Obviously scared out of her mind and unsure if he really is unconscious, Sydney reaches forward to pull off the mask.
Don't see it.
Cheap, but I liked it.
Sydney decides, fuck it, and climbs over Ghostface and out of the car. But despite being outside, Hallie's door still won't open, and now Hallie needs to follow Sydney's lead and do the exact same thing. By this point, when I originally watched this film, I kept saying to myself, oh, he's definitely going to get up now. He's really going to wake up now. But amazingly, Hallie gets out of the car too. The two girls run off, but Sydney hesitates and heads back, wanting to know who's under the mask. Why? Why didn't she just pull the mask off when they were outside the car? Returning, she finds the seat empty, and before anyone can react, Ghostface attacks, and with Sydney helpless to stop, he stabs Hallie to death before pursuing Sydney back to the campus.
I have such a problem with the payoff for this scene. The only thing that lets it down is its climax. The characters are so smart until the very end, which hurts it a little in my opinion. Why not pull the mask off there? Why run away and then come back? I mean, they do try to cover it by having the window open on the far side of the car to show where he got out, but the payoff for this scene, especially the way it was shot, it's so predictable. As soon as you see this shot, you know he's going to jump out.
Back at the college, Gale emerges from her hiding place only to run into a blood-covered Cotton who claims he was trying to help Dewey. Frantic, she runs outside, snatching the phone off Debbie and calls the police, believing Cotton is the actual killer. Back at another location of the college, Sydney hears music coming from the drama studio, and even though no one is around, she runs onto the stage calling loudly. Now this is what I meant when I said the climax felt a little off to me. It just feels like they're having to strip Sydney of all her smarts to make it all work, which goes against everything we've come to know about her for the last two films. Sealed on stage by the set scenery, she's startled as Derek drops from the rafters, unconscious and gagged after his punishment from the brothers. As Sydney attempts to release him, Ghostface approaches, slowly and deliberately, and unmasks himself, revealing the killer to be Mickey.
Surprise, Sydney.
Yeah, I expected that. No, I wasn't impressed. Now, I do like Timothy Olyphant, and I thought he was great in the movie Go, but here, he's playing it too over the top, and trying to come across as too crazy. It's one of the reasons I love Skeet Ulrich's portrayal as Billy. He starts out calm and gets madder and madder as the scene goes on, and by the end he's a raving lunatic. But it's believable. With Mickey, not so much.
Mickey, doing what he's been doing through the whole movie, begins messing with Sydney's head, and claims Derek has been helping him the whole time, and berates Derek for getting himself tied up, leaving him all alone for the night. Derek desperately tries to convince Sydney of his innocence, but before anything can be decided, Mickey shoots Derek fatally, allowing Sydney a final moment to apologise for not trusting him before he dies. This leads to Mickey giving us his motive, and surprisingly, he's fucking nuts, and it also leads to him announcing his intended defence.
I'm gonna blame the movies.
Sydney doesn't like this and lets Mickey know, holding her own until he draws a knife and a gun. Cheap bastard. The raise of Derek's body suddenly signals the arrival of Mickey's partner in crime, and now it's time for the big reveal.
Gail? The reporter?
Mrs. Loomis?
Billy's mother!
What a twist! I like it. It's got a nice Friday the 13th ring to it.
However, the same problem I have with Mickey being the killer is the one I have with Mrs. Loomis. Laurie plays the role too over the top. I mean, look at her eyes. Do they really need to be that wide? It becomes more comical than it does scary. You know exactly what she's going to do. She starts calm and then goes crazy with no real build. Again, with Billy and Skeet's portrayal of the character, they got it just right, and that's why he's still my favourite Ghostface. Loomis, being the insane bitch that she is, decides that the blame the movies motive is a load of old bullshit, and she doesn't really need Mickey anymore, and shoots him, which leads to Mickey letting off a single shot that connects with Gail's ribs, sending her toppling off the stage and out of sight, leaving us with Sydney against Mrs. Loomis. After some really hammy over-the-top acting in which Mrs. Loomis admits to killing Randy, blames Sydney and her mother for the destruction of her family and the death of her son, Sydney has enough of the eyeball monster, clocks her with a bottle and then goes special effects crazy with the scenery. I just love Nave's little smile here. It's a mixture of both psychotic and enjoyment. Sydney goes to town on the levers with an axe, pretty much destroying the staging in the process, and manages to trap Mrs. Loomis under a pile of staged bricks. Heading to the exit though, Sydney's ambushed in yet another fairly predictable scene as Loomis goes absolutely batshit crazy now, pinning Sydney down and pressing the knife closer to her face. Before she can connect, a gunshot announces the arrival of Cotton, who clearly has no idea what's going on. Sydney introduces Mrs. Loomis, the killer, and what I love about Lee's performance here is he's actually more annoyed that this woman isn't a reporter. The bargaining gets laid down with Mrs. Loomis begging Cotton to let her kill Sydney.
She sent you to prison for a year! Personally, I think it's rather poetic.
Cotton holds the one thing over Sydney that he has for her to take, the interview with Diane Sawyer, suggesting that if she takes the interview, she's safe. Now, I wonder which one she'll choose.
Consider it done.
Ah, what a hero. Cotton shoots Mrs. Loomis and then gets the scare of his life from Gail, who despite a gunshot wound is still alive. Looking down at the dead body of Mrs. Loomis, taking Randy's last words from Scream 1 into account, Mickey revives, only to get the hell shot out of him. Not taking any chances, Sydney places a bullet right between Mrs. Loomis's eyes. In the aftermath, we see Joel, being the actual smart man, return after the killings and hands the microphone back to Gail, hoping to get the scoop. Amazingly though, Dewey is still alive and being wheeled out on a gurney. Unlike the first film though, this time Gail abandons her reporting duties and goes with Dewey to the emergency room, which is a really nice little touch and shows the growth of their characters through this film.
I'm coming with you.
Sydney, meanwhile, in her debt to Cotton, proclaims him the hero and passes the torch of attention over to him before walking off alone.
And that's Scream 2. Now I know I nitpicked about a lot more things in this one than I did Scream 1, but I do prefer Scream 2 in the series. And I think it's mainly because of some of the scenes I pointed out there, but also the energy the film seems to have and the chemistry the actors all have together. Plus, it left the door open for a sequel. And 3 years later, we got Scream 3. I'm parched. I'm going to have to go out there.